if you, the two of you, any one of you can start, you can tell us a little bit about yourself. And but here, why are you twirling your hair?
Okay. I was thinking, okay, listen, but what I was thinking about was really before you get started, what I was thinking about was Chris Rock talking about, he always says, we're not talking about rich, we're talking about wealth. And I think that one of the things that I want you to do after you introduce yourselves is really talk about at some point in this conversation the difference between those things. So because I don't think people are trying to get rich, trying to make money, but they don't understand the idea of what does it mean to establish and sustain wealth. So.
Should we start there? That's a good way to start.
All right.
Well, I'll start, I guess.
Though. Yeah, you still have to
my name is Malik Bell, and I have worked in financial services for many, many years, and I don't think that anyone in that industry would call themselves an expert, because it's a very dynamic field to be in, and no one, quote unquote, masters certain parts of it, perhaps. But I think the reason why I gravitated toward it, and part of what led me to actually do it, was because I had not a lot of experience. I have very wonderful, tremendous, accomplished family members who are educators, who are very well respected, but I didn't have a sense that I knew enough about this area. And one of the things that really drove me to it was environmental. It was just the school that I attended, and I remember my friends asked me what I was going to be doing for the summer. And I told them, well, I'm going to go to the park and play basketball. I'm going to hang out. And then all of them began to rattle off what their internships would be for that summer. Some said Fidelity, some said Goldman, some said all these things back in Boston. And they kind of laughed at mine like I was joking, but I was really serious. But at the same time, I did have an interest in it. I felt, I should at least know, a few things about this. And I got an education that's priceless. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how much it changed the way that I viewed the world around me and the decisions that I would make and how I would make them. And then some of them, I would have to really challenge myself to move beyond just sort of my instincts. I mean, a lot of us African Americans, we have instinctual behaviors that are built on our ability to survive and propagate families and to do things the way that we had seen generations perhaps before do in order to ensure our survival. And some of those tools are not effective for what we're engaging today. The instinct is still there. I mean, but at the same time, you have to really force yourself to grow out of those things. And you don't do that unless you take some risks, or at least you have people there to help guide you through that process. So I guess for me, understanding what wealth is, I mean, and everybody has a different answer to this. For me, a wealth would simply mean being able to wake up and decide where and what you do with your time and your vocation. It just simply means I have the ability to wake up and not have other people, organizations, or institutions organize my time for me. And that to me is the best possible scenario. People have jobs and vocations which they love, and they don't mind that they're structured within a format that's not theirs and doesn't belong to them. But for me, it's simply being able to get out of bed and not have those pressures, or not to be threatened or have a livelihood threatened immediately by not being able to having a job, or not by having to have to go into a job that has specific demands and that sort of thing. I mean, and I suppose different people have different definitions, and I'll just leave it at that, and maybe give Russell a chance to introduce himself. So.
Thank you, Malik. I love the way you laid out your perspective, and I think some of what you said is very powerful, so I won't even go near that. In terms of my story, I've always been poor, okay? And so what I wanted was, how do you make it in the world? In fact, I'll never forget, I was a student in an airplane flying over some city in America, and I was looking down on all of the houses. And I thought to myself, how in the world does a person get a house like that? And how is it that so many people have figured that out, but I have not? And so there was that desire to be relevant, to actually exist. It's an interesting thing. I think until a person really has that, just those basics, you're kind of always thinking that you're not quite there, that you're in the shadows, that you really, frankly, there, in my mind, I didn't even exist, right? And so I'll never forget, I went through college and the rest of it, and I said, okay, where does a person go to figure out how to do finance? And there was an opportunity to get an MBA. And when I looked at what my MBA would focus on, I had to pick finance because I think I knew some of the other aspects, but this was something I really did not understand at all. And so I'll never forget, those first days taking the classes and when you're learning, modern portfolio theory and other things like this, and not really having had that robust mathematics background. You're kind of catching everything that you should have learned both in college and then also in the class that you're in, all at once. So it was like, the proverbial drinking from a fire hydrant, but I had to do it. And, got through that, got out, and then had to work in a large American corporation with, finance. And, it was mostly accounting in that setting. But then there was an opportunity where I had the chance to work with the pension of a major American corporation and pick the investments, and I loved it. I absolutely loved that process of deciding where to allocate capital. And so, to kind of make a long story shorter, I now have my own business, and it is my professional responsibility to help my clients pick the places where they are going to put their capital so that they can make the decisions that allow them to retire with dignity, to maintain their desired lifestyle for a lifetime. And I love it. And, when I have the privilege of working with African Americans who, frankly, were where I was years ago, just trying to figure out how do I get my first house, that's the most exciting thing because I know that struggle. And frankly, it begins here. And so I hope tonight that we can talk about some of these things. Thank you for having me.
Unmute me. I'm grateful to have you on. I'm wondering if we can talk about building wealth and the notion of home ownership. Let me kind of put forth what I'm thinking. My area, my lane is healing. Hence, be the healing. New T-shirt. Gonna have them available really soon. This actually got it today for my birthday, so it's really nice. And someone in my company actually sent it to me. But what I think about in terms of wealth and health, looking at the social determinants of health, they've been able to use as a proxy home ownership to determine how healthy you will be as an adult. And to also measure how many years, for example, your family owned their home as a child and your life expectancy. I mean, these things are connected, and yet we understand that we are much bigger than the house we're in. So it's not the house in a material sense, right? And at the same time, it is a house in a material sense, but it's the house in terms of a bigger picture of stability, well-being, safety, courage, fear. All of those things are somehow folded into this notion of wealth and health and stability and sustainability. So I know I've said a lot of things there, but I want you all to talk about that idea of ownership, stability, and well-being. And anybody can start.
Russell, go ahead.
When a human being has a home, right? The home is not the physical residence. It's a place where you come in and you're loved. But as Dr. Joy just said, if there is not a stable place for the home to flourish, which is a physical thing, it is a material thing, if we're being honest, if there isn't that dwelling, brick and mortar, whatever it is, the home is compromised. There is not a hearth. We talk about home and hearth is the place where people gather and they experience love, affirmation, fulfillment. And this is where the health and well-being of a human being begins. And so if we're talking about the first step towards that in any community, it would be the unit, husband and wife. And if we're talking about America, I would argue that it's very difficult Not impossible, but it's hard to earn the income required to sustain a home on one income. Some people do it. My mother did it, God bless her. But if we're talking about the very first step, one of the things that I would say that I do to say to all the young people that I work with is, remember, marriage is an asset decision. In fact, that's where it all begins, right? Making the decision to select a helpmate, a cohort, a partner, someone that you can covenant with. Now, so I'm going to talk about it from both perspectives, but the bottom line is that homeownership begins with a covenant. It's a contract between you and a bank. And for most people don't have the cash sitting around to go in, plop it down and say, okay, this is my home. What you do is you save a little bit, you have your down payment, and you go to the bank and you say, okay, hey, you know what? I'd like you to be my partner in the ownership of my first and most foundational asset. Now, if you can do that with another human being, that's a great thing. And the first thing I'd say to you is, if you're in that process of courtship and mate selection, honestly, the foundational step to wealth and prosperity is picking that person you're going to go through that process with. The first thing you're going to see with them is, can you keep a promise? Can you covenant with me? So take the first 3 months when you're courting someone and just see if they keep their promises or not. That's a really important thing. Now, if you're on your own, one of the things that you're going to want to do before you actually go to the bank and try to get that loan is say, okay, what is the mortgage of a house that I would like to have? It's a number. You can call up a bank and say, okay, I'm looking at a house. It's 300,000 or 200,000. What's the mortgage going to be if I only have 5%, right? And then they will tell you, and it's a number. And so what you want to do is say, okay, how close am I right now in my situation to meeting that monthly mortgage payment? That's the first thing I did. So I said, okay, I know I can handle this because my rent is this much, the mortgage is this much, I can get it. And those are my, again, building block remarks. Malik, I want to defer to you and see what you'll add or correct.
No, much of the decision around economics tends to be empirical, and we forget often that economics is a social science. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a sort of one of those things where they talk about behavioral science these days, where you fuse two disciplines together and hope to be able to have predictable outcomes, or, much of the way that we conceive economy has to do with production, consumption, and then the accumulation of wealth. And it's a very particular system that we're in. I don't want to get into a larger discussion about that, only to say that I think there are things that are contrary to what we're talking about with that in the system. And that is, I always start with, what does it take for a person to simply be a human being? And that is the realization that when they put their head on the pillow, they have the reasonable expectation that they will wake up and be unharmed, that they will have food in their stomach, on a regular basis. If you don't have that, within a few hours, you turn into a different person. And you have to have love, and you have to have that security. And that's where we are sort of interacting. And so, when you start talking about what humans really need, those are foundational. And then, like you were saying before, I think that what's really key is understanding that the way that U.S. institutions or financial institutions deal with human beings is as units, as consumers, as sort of these individualized instruments, as you will. And one of the most important things that you have to do is figure out what that unit looks like to you. And like Russell was saying, possibly the most important decision you're going to make is who you're going to move through this life with. And that's just a very real thing. I mean, I don't want to like sort of generalize, but I just think in general, people are really blasé about who they invite into intimate spaces in their lives, and it has lifelong implications in any context. And so, like Russell was saying, that decision is paramount. I mean, we're very, very trivial. If you can see the end in the beginning of a relationship, then you shouldn't do it. Just be done with it. I mean, it doesn't help. It wastes your time. It wastes the other person's time. Move on. Go somewhere where you. Say again?
But what about, and I agree with you, but what about, so there are people who, for instance, and I think that I agree with everything you both have said. I think that people are underestimating and devaluing the idea of marriage and partnership as a financial decision, but I'm also thinking about the people right now who are at home, who maybe they're going into a financial relationship with their brother, their sister, or we're going to buy a house, we're going to buy a property. You know, the same thing applies, right? I was reading some.
Yeah. So what I was talking about was like, what Russell was talking about was the nuclear family and that being a unit in itself. In fact, taxation and marriage, sort of the state really recognizing marriage was really about tax rolls. It really wasn't about like anything else.
Right.
So when you think about just marriage in general and the way that sort of U.S. institutions look at it, they looked at it first as a sort of a unit of taxation. You know, in fact, the country wasn't really founded on the idea of like truth, liberty, and freedom. It was no taxation without representation. That's what started. Okay, that's what really got to go. Right. So the being able to have those same types of relationships, I think that also does extend to your greater family, because I think when it comes to planning, you're not planning simply for your nuclear family. You're planning for, 2 or 3 generations down the line. Your children, what effect, what you're doing now will have on, it's the reason why I guess most people traditionally hand down heirlooms. It's a way to show that a person, that does not exist, that you care for them, that you're planning for their care in a time where they don't exist yet. I mean, I think that's so fundamental and just amazing. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
You're muted, Joy.
Say something about that in that continuity, which of course is about, how do you look at a future? Now, again, you all know that I'm always going to look at the historical context. And of course, Africans have been doing, and the civilization has gone on and families and all of that, but African Americans in this country have a different kind of experience. Mm-hmm. And so when one is trying to survive in an extraordinarily hostile environment, and then you get out of that, I keep seeing all of these, I don't know if any of you are watching all of these shows that keep looking at Greenwood, that keep looking at Tulsa. And when Black people did have, their own thing, they literally bombed the place, right? So when you start trying to imagine a future for yourself and for your children, and you have this history, right? There is this kind of, I talk about learned helplessness, mm-hmm. right? If you've never had ownership, as far as back as you can see, nobody ever owned anything. Everybody was just trying to survive. How does one in 2020, in the middle of COVID, begin to build a notion of continuity and future for themselves and their families? How do we do that with all that we've been through, with all that we now know, with the current circumstances? Can you imagine how difficult this is for folks?
But even for people, for me, I'm thinking though, but it's even of habits of mind and habits of thinking. Even for us, there are multiple people in our family who have owned homes, right? Mm-hmm. I think that if my child wanted to go and own a home, I could lay out some of the things they needed to do, but it's not because it has been wired in us generationally, right? Mm-hmm. I think that enough of us have had a conversation like, how do you do this? Or I'm learning about refinancing, about all kinds of things I'm trying to figure out now, right? But the whole idea of there are things that people just naturally do, right? Like Malik was saying, that wasn't that first year those people thought about an internship. Their families have multiple people before them have been doing it this way. So we have the same way, like just one small thing that you guys are gonna say, this has nothing to do with it. But I grew up with parents, sorry, Dr. Joy, who loved to drive around on E. It was stressful, but I was used to it, right? So when I got a car, I was always going, oh, I gotta get gas in the morning. And then one day I was like, that is unnecessary stress. That is an unnecessary amount of stress that I'm putting on myself in the morning to get some gas before I have to get somewhere. Like just the habit of thinking of doing that, to saying, you know what, never let your car go beneath the half tank so you don't have to ever have the panic feeling in the morning. But that's what I'm saying. There are so many habits that people have developed around financial literacy and making decisions that so many of us, educated or not, poor or not, but whatever it is, still don't have those habits ingrained. And so what I'm hoping you guys can give some tidbits, I know Russell's time is very limited, is to give the folks who are watching a couple of habits that they can develop right now that will put them in a mode of starting to think differently, because we're all we're all wired to a certain extent to survive. So how do we start thinking about thriving by changing some of those narratives? You know,
Malik, do you mind if I jump on this?
Sure, go right ahead.
Thank you. So if each of you could please, and you're listening, I'd like you to take out a notebook, because I'm going to tell you something, and it's this. The process of building wealth is actually so simple. In fact, if it's more than 4 steps, I've misdirected you. The first step is to get really good sense of what it is that you're blessed with. I'm a Baha'i, and one of the things that's found in the Baha'i teachings is this concept of every human being having been endowed by our maker with potentialities. Baha'u'llah says, regard man as a mind rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So the first step is to understand what's your talent, what's your jam, right? That's one. Number 2, take that, educate that, and translate it into marketable capabilities. I got a jam. I got to take that jam and make it into either specific products or services that the market will pay me cash flows for. So take my talent, make it into cash flows. The third thing is, when the cash flows come in, you only take a fraction of it for today's consumption. The rest of it you're using to purchase assets. Okay, really, these 3 things: know your talent, cultivate it into cash flows, and then take the cash flows and take the majority of them and put it into assets. Now, the 4th one is the revolutionary concept, and I need you to just try to embrace it. And it gets to what Dr. Joy said. One of the things we have to appreciate about America is that cruelty has been intertwined in the pursuit of the dream of prosperity. We are all familiar with the 1619 Project, right? And the first Africans that came here were acquired through an act of brutality. There was a Portuguese ship. It had its loot, which included slaves. An English ship came to the Portuguese ship, attacked it, killed all the people that were running the ship, and took its bounty and brought it to America. So cruelty is how we have, from the very beginning of the formation of this nation, in fact, prior to the formation of the nation in 1776, right, gone about the process of acquiring capacity. So I get my capacity by being stronger and better able at wielding woe on you and subjugating you into my instrument, right? So that's the first thing, is we've used cruelty to get capacity and capital. All right. So what we have to look at is that from the very beginning of this time, there have been those who bought into that, used their skin, the whole concept of white supremacy and all of that. It was an ideology that allowed human beings to get comfortable with cruelty. Not everyone bought into that. So if we look back at history, prior to the actual formation of the United States in 1776, there was a group of people called the Quakers. They were the wealthiest Americans, period. And they made their wealth by capturing whales. And in their creed, they rejected slavery. And so the very first very wealthy Black person was a person called Captain Paul Coffey. His father was a slave, and the Quakers let him go. And this would take a long time to tell the entire story, but the bottom line is that Captain Coffey knew he had a talent for ships. He built ships that he owned. He took his ships to England, brought them back, and he became fabulously wealthy, okay? But he was only able to do that because he had white partners. And one of the big things I will tell you is that for the African Americans that have truly been ridiculously wealthy in this country, they don't do it just with their own family or their own color. They have white partners. And Paul Coffey had white partners. Now, make no mistake about it. Initially, he was all about his own family, but he also had and allowed whites to have interest in his business. And so one of the things I'll say to you is that once you get those 3 things going, you want to find someone that is not in your world and say, hey, I'd like you to be my partner. And it could be something as simple as, hey, I'd like you to be the one who spiritually prays for and has an interest in my thriving in my community. So where I live in the Central Valley, I have several white folks who have an interest in me thriving. It's part of their love. It's part of, that. And we need more of that. Because if we think about the world as it's unfolding, and my perspective is colored by my understanding of the teachings of the Baha'i faith, which says that, hey, God wants us all to get along, okay? Now, we're swimming against the tide. Make no mistake about it. This history of cruelty to make capital is deep. But there's also this history from the very prior to even 1776 of people stepping out of that. And many did it just on the basis of their faith. That's a very powerful thing. So you want to have allies and others that are interested in your thriving than just the people that are in your own family or your own color.
So how do you get past the people then? Because I agree with you, and I definitely think that, of course, from a Baha'i vantage point, of course, I'm completely in line with you. I also think that there is a noted distrust because historically people have tried to get those people who said they're invested in them. And those very people have abused, misused, taken, stolen, renamed, claimed, all that they tried to get them to invest in, right? So there's this weird, and that's the truth, right? There are plenty of, I was reading this whole thing on Jack Daniels, right? And the Jack Daniels family, and that, like, there's everything. Jack Daniels is in everything almost, right? Then you go to Jack Daniels wings and Jack Daniels' actual family really suffered. So you start to think about when people do partner, part of one of the things that Mom talks about a lot is know when you should trust those white people. Know when you should, know that when someone is, and maybe even figuring out the markers to how do I know this person is trustworthy and sincerely invested in my growth and my thriving, right? Because you can't just trust everybody. That history of cruelty and greed is very entrenched in our community, right? So yes, I do think that we have to be able to look outside of ourselves. But what has also happened with the burning of cities like Tulsa and the things that happen is that people also don't want to work with one another. There's a vibe in that where he first had to get with some people who look like him to have an idea of this. And then he was able to add some more people. But we're not even getting with those initial folks who look like us, who are actually invested in our well-being. You know what I'm saying? I have a business. I've worked with other people who have beauty businesses, and I've been advised by other Black people, don't help them succeed. They're in the same area as you. Like, listen, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I don't need to be the only one whose hair oil you like. It is fine with me, and I think that part of that is the healing part. Like, we have to, one, think about how we're shifting our mindset around who we don't trust, but also thinking about why we don't trust them, and then figuring out from there how to navigate ourselves forward. Because right now, I can't just in good conscience tell a whole bunch of Black people go out there and find some good white people, because I don't necessarily know that they know how to do that. And you know what I'm saying? I'll look up and they're like, you told me, and they stole all my stuff. So I think we gotta find, you know what I'm saying?
Maybe I can help a little bit.
Thank you.
I completely understand. I think the functional premise of how to supply an unlimited amount of want and need with a finite amount of goods and resources. So automatically, you've been set up. With this premise has been accepted. First, nothing that a human being needs is finite. In that sense, what humans need is in abundance. We need love, we need a little bit of food, and then we're finite. We're not gonna be here forever. Okay, so we don't have needs that are unlimited in that sense. If you have an unlimited want, that to me speaks to something more deep in your psyche. That's something that is, it doesn't exist. You can't quantify it. It's one of those things that's like counterfactual. What is unlimited want? Can't even visualize. It's like saying infinity. You can't describe it appropriately. So when we are set up with these preconditions, which lead us to sort of accept these fundamentals, you start to talk about things in terms of scarcity. And again, nothing that a human needs is scarce. Nothing that a human needs is scarce. Then you lead to the idea of commodification and monetization and over monetization to the point where you can monetize the value of a human and sell him or her. Okay, so we're talking about a fundamental landscape which is warped. It doesn't really, to the extent that you have a very particular value system that I should say, pre and post Renaissance was able to take sort of the material advancements came by way of Islam into Europe by way of the university, the admission of the university, and take all of those scientific, I mean, I always ask people, algebra is not an English word or a European word. Chemistry isn't either. And all these things allow them to project this value system all over the world. And to the extent that the world has sort of has accepted the idea that the way that you go about deriving a livelihood is to quantify, commodify, and create product out of what you have. And so that becomes the central activity of the human being. I don't believe that to be, as a Baha'i, what we are sort of called upon to do as human beings. However, what we are living in right now, and you've asked a very good question, Bahia, which is, what do I do right now? Malik, you're talking about all this stuff right now about what has happened and what we're dealing with, and what do we do right now? And so I answer that question in my opinion too. But I wanted to lay that down because Russell brought up some brilliant things, which is, we're dealing with a history that is basically intertwined with this. In fact, I say this is baked in. This is like, you can't really uncrack an egg. I don't know how you extricate, ingredients from something that's already been put in the oven. And I don't know how to do that. If I could, I would make a suggestion. I mean, you're talking about monetize an idea. My God, I mean, who wouldn't want to, be at the head of that? But I don't know how to counteract that particular thing. And the world has, I mean, most of the problems that we're looking at in terms of the environment, we're talking about, well, is the world really a Walmart? Are we supposed to put a price tag on everything? Does the environment suffer when we strip mine and strip it of its elements? And what is this? Can we just continue to do this thing, without recourse or without any consequence? But anyway, I'll leave it at that. But one of the things that I say to do with your children and your family, first, I say, like following up on what Russell said, which is you have a partner who you can be consistent with. I play tennis and I'm getting old. I can't play basketball anymore. Not like I want to. It's awful. But I can hit a tennis ball back and forth. And you know what? I'm not trying to score points on you, my partner. I'm just trying to get some exercise, and I want you to hit the ball back. So let's be consistent. Let's just build. Let's just be so what I'm saying is, can you stay employed or do your best to stay employed? Can you make it, just like Russell was saying, this is a covenant that you're making. This is a partnership. Let's just hit the ball back and forth together for a couple, 5, 10 years and see where that puts us. Let's just be consistent with the things that we have responsibilities for. Okay. The second thing I think is important is how we talk around our children about money. I never, ever, ever have ever in my life around my children said, I can't afford something. The truth is I can't afford everything, but they don't have a context with which to understand what that means. Like you were saying, there's triggers that people have when they hear we can't afford it. It puts that adrenaline in your body, perhaps. You can't afford it. And there really isn't anything a child should want that you really can't afford.
I can afford too much stuff. I think I can afford everything. That's my problem. Is you think that I can afford everything.
Well, of course, that too, because that does it doesn't give them the idea of where they are financially, like what their parents are like, and that's actually a good place because then you can actually talk to your children when they get a little older about the reality of their family's financial situation. But it shouldn't be introduced to them in terms that are negative. I mean, it should never be in that situation. I tell my children all the time, that's not a priority. It's just not a priority. And if your child wants something you can't afford from 0 to 5, there's a problem already. Because I'm just saying, a 5-year-old doesn't need anything.
I want a Bentley.
Exactly. If they're talking about, all this stuff at 5, really got a problem. But
okay,
anyway.
I have a question. Okay. Wait a minute. I think that one of the things, I don't know why this word keeps coming up for me, but the word greed keeps coming up for me. And so much of, especially in this country, I was having a conversation today with somebody, about the whole idea that what's enough? In this country, it's insatiable. There's never you always want a bigger one, a newer one, more of them, a shinier one, a one bigger than my neighbors. It's this insatiable desire. And so that's why I think when we start having this conversation, it's hard to have it because we don't have a balance. So as much as people, for example, look at the United States and come here because they want to prosper, because from where they came from, hey, this is a wonderful thing. But what people aren't realizing is what happens when things go into excess. What happens when it becomes so big and so ugly, this monolith that is really oppressive after a while. And what happens if it breaks down? So you have people that have an interest in the United States, but not an understanding of this space and how we came here, arrived, and why we can't keep doing the same thing. We cannot continue doing what we're doing. And I think that my head explodes because I'm going.
What Wessel said was that the first thing is to see what is your jam. And I think that part of the work that we're always doing is convincing our folks that they have a jam.
Like a jam or a gym?
He said, what's my jam? Like, what are the thing that you're good at? What's my jam?
What's your thing? What's your thing?
What's your thing? Jam
right.
on.
Jam.
Come on, Joy. Come on. No. So the idea though of what is the thing that I'm good at? What is the thing that I was made with, that I have, that I bring to the table, that I didn't, either I learned it or I've always had it in me, or I've seen it and I want to be more of that. That piece right now in our community is lacking. Everybody doesn't necessarily believe they have that.
Well,
I talk to little kids who said, I don't think I'm gonna have that great of a life, because they don't believe they have it in them. And I'm going, so first, when he said that, first find out the thing that you're good at. The first thing I thought was, first, let you know that there is a thing that you're good at.
One of the things, it's like the college conversation. People say, I don't want to go to college because I don't know what I want to do. Well, go to college and then you find out what you want to do. And
you want to pay some loans.
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about in terms of people who are sort of first or second generation immigrants to the United States is they're not looking at their jam. They're looking at what can be done, particularly in Southeast and in Asian countries. They're not coming over here to figure out what they're good at. They have the problem of, basically maybe the European problem of modernity in antiquity. Europeans left Europe. I always say that people leave their country of origin to try to figure out a better situation. Rarely do people go from a bad situation to a worse, or looking for a worse situation. They're looking for a better situation. So Europeans left Europe because it was on fire. The king owned everything. You didn't have a chance of getting anything. You moved here because this was the best opportunity for you to do what you had to do. Now, you did it under circumstances that were specious. They introduced the idea of scarcity and commodity, which means that there must be disparity in order to identify value in anything. So disparity becomes the basis of value in this system. What is valuable is based on what is available, or who has the most of it, or who sets the price, and all those sorts of things. So those are concepts that you have to really look at. So like a lot of people who come to this country are not looking to figure out what their jam is. So at the end of the day, you have to look around and say, what can be done? Even if it's not my jam or the thing that I want to do, what can be done on this landscape? I may be in a very small town in rural America with not a lot of access to certain things. I have to look around and say, what can I do? What can I do to generate economic activity? Do I need capital? Do I need these things? Ask these questions. Should I move? This is actually a very good thing. You're talking about, like, I like the idea you started with home ownership, because that's been the linchpin of wealth building in this country for many, many years. I know there's more pitfalls today, but at the same time, so much of your life is predicated, or at least is dictated about where you live. Your voting basically is impacted by where you live. Your tax basis, your ability to use, certain type of public infrastructure is tied to where you live. All these things have to do with where you live. So these decisions are fundamental, how in terms of where you are in the country and what you should be doing in terms of financial activity. So, I mean, it varies quite a bit in terms of what you're looking at when you're there. And you have to be very practical about it and make sacrifices too. I mean, there's been everybody on the screen I know has made hard decisions about certain things and had to basically endure for long periods of times in situations that we wouldn't consider ideal, but it paid off, or at least there was a way to actually move from one place to another, or at least make progress in a way that you had planned to make progress.
You guys, I have to go. I'm literally 16 minutes over, but I want to get back to Dr. Joy's question. She said, okay, how do you, in a country with our history, partner with people that have been the problem, right? And all of you have touched on the fact that it's not just that we've had this history, this ideology of white supremacy and racism that emerged to keep a group of people constantly lapping all the benefits, right? What do you do? How do you partner with people in that environment? Okay, so I want to answer that and say, from the perspective of what Baha'u'llah has offered. And basically what Baha'u'llah has done is offered us a radical reconceptualization of value, getting to that concept. And Malik, I've enjoyed listening to you. I can tell you're a proper social scientist around economics and wealth. The deal here is that Baha'u'llah has said that all that we can observe and try to acquire in this world is worth as much as the black in the eye of a dead ant. Okay, so I've thought of this for years because actually, I'm in the business of making people rich, right? But Baha'u'llah said all the stuff that I do, right, is not worth a speck in the eye of a dead ant. And when I think of that, I think that the corollary of that is human feces. Bear with me another moment. If you think about food, it's so attractive, and for me, I love to eat, right? But the thing about it is it's just an input that allows my body to function. And if you think about a human being in this world, a lot of instances where wealth is gained through evil. But then for a lot of other folks, they do it because they're honest. They have all these virtues. And if we look at the instance going back to Paul Cuffey, he was very wealthy because very early on in his life, he mastered a lot of virtues. And if you talk about the immigrants that come here, as Malik was saying, and find a place where there's a need and they fill the need, they're not necessarily pursuing their interest or their jam. These things are all virtues. Well, the waste product of virtues is money. Okay. And I say waste product of virtue because if we think about what goes with us to the next world, if we just go back to the simple fact that this is temporary, it is an intense, profoundly important, and highly demanding, make no mistake about it, material existence, but it is at the end of the day just material and preparatory to something which is permanent and spiritual. So once we get that through our heads, we realize, oh, I don't need to lay the emphasis on it that I see the American society has historically done. And if we look at the work being done in the Baha'i community with something as simple as Book 1, what is the essence that we're learning in Book 1? Life is temporary. In fact, it culminates, the last part of it is you're going to die, and this is what death looks like. And so that you're prepared for that experience, you want to connect with the Word of God and get into the business of systematically manifesting virtue. Book 11 touches on wealth. And it's about people getting together and pooling their capital for the benefit of the community. What I will argue is that the next major migration, because we've talked about human beings moving from one place to another to have a better circumstance, is not going to be from one country to another, but from isolation and individualism, which is one of the core founding parts of America, to community.
Absolutely.
People are dying for community. And the thing that we observe about President Trump is that he represents in hyperbole individualism. Just me, it's all about me. And the whole country is witnessing with dismay, right? The logical, disastrous consequences of just being all about yourself. And it's screaming for an alternative. And so in the Baha'i community, the migration that we have the privilege of helping humanity embrace is putting wealth in its proper perspective and helping build communities where your value is determined by your virtues. And really, at the end of the day, this is the last thing I'll say, the whole wonder of the Paul Cuffey story is that he was beloved in a country that had made a philosophy that said that because of his color, he had to be hated, but he was loved and he belonged by virtue, not by color. Even though he had tried to escape and make a place where all the people of a certain color could be, he realized at the end, but hey, this is a place where I have to step in and use my virtue and expand the space, make community. And I'm sorry that I have to rush, but I literally...
We appreciate you. We
appreciate you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I will just say for all the people who are like, what is all this mystical conversation? Because this is not a Baha'i channel. We happen to know a lot of Baha'is because we're Baha'i, so we end up bringing them. They don't know this is not a Baha'i channel. So
Yeah, not a Baha'i channel.
So it's not a Baha'i channel, but you know a little bit more about the Baha'i faith today. But we also are talking about, we think about value, and that is where we have to get to. We started Be the Healing in the first place because we wanted to remind people during this stressful very traumatizing time, that you have so much value and you have so much power and ability, even in your own home, even in your little apartment, even you have the ability to create and manifest greatness. And what we're trying to do today is say, okay, we've said this week after week. This is how you can, have your light shine a little brighter. This is how you can beam light into your children. This is how you can take control of your health. And so we're asking, now just Malik, all the pressure's on you to think about, I liked his list. That's a great list. If you were going to give some people some concrete things that they can do or stop doing today to start thinking about putting themselves on the path to creating sustainable financial stability for their family moving forward.
And Malik did mention something that I think is critical, both he and Russell, and that is, what are we saying to our children? What are we telling them? I grew up with parents that are very hardworking people, did not have advanced education, didn't have those things, but really did create a foundation from which the two of you have come. In spite of all the missteps and all the issues in the family, they really did see a different kind of future for their children. And you mentioned, Malik, the whole idea of, what are we saying to our children? Oh, we can't afford that. Or what are we creating this kind of helpless victim that feels like, I'm stuck. I can't, I can't get past this. Right. And I'm going, when people say that to me, I'm going, do you know what we've been through? What do you mean you can't do it? What do you mean? How could you say such a thing at this point, given everything we've come through? Yet at the same time, I'm looking at all this and I'm going, and people who know me, my family in particular, I don't want anything else.
Yeah.
I really don't. I want to help others. I want to help other people get a leg up or whatever. I don't need no more stuff. My God, I don't need any more stuff. Yeah. But I really do. And for some people, they're like, you always need a bigger house. And
I can imagine
don't
that.
want a bigger house. I know the richest people I know don't care the least about the people that I know.
Honestly, you realize you're not in this game forever. You on your way out. It happens so quickly.
When was you born? You're on your way to dying.
You just start to get to a sense where you start to understand who you are yourself, and then you're on your way out. So you can't spend all your time simply trying. I mean, you spend like maybe the first 20 years of your conscious life trying to build yourself into something useful and something that you can try to monetize and get a job or do something. Right. And then after 20 years into that perhaps career, where you look up and you go, you know what? I'm not, maybe you even enjoy it. And perhaps hopefully you enjoy it and you can do it for a long time, but you go, you know what? If I don't do something beyond myself, create something beyond myself that can be good for others, I'm not any good to anybody. I mean, I'm not going to say that categorically. Raise good, healthy families. By and large, that's your number one responsibility. But outside of that, you want to make sure that other people have the opportunity to raise good, healthy families, because your children, your progeny live in this world. You know what I'm saying? If not for that selfish reason that happens. So, one of the things that we have to look at, my grandfather was run out of Mississippi for being a good business person. You know what I'm saying? Back in the Depression era. So I understand what it's like for people to have to start over, or to look at your grandfather and say, I could have done things differently. I had a mind to do things differently, and be disappointed about that. But at the same time, here we are. So, I know these things happen, and that we have a history where people are deprived of economic opportunity, and are also, when you go through economic deprivation, you can't tell a person, well, think about spiritual virtues first. I agree that you should, but it's hard. You can't tell somebody who's having trouble paying their rent, just
love. That's not right. Love on that.
That's not right. It's not just for me to suggest that. Right. So what I try to do is tell people, hey, look, you have to figure out a way to, again, figure out how you can live in such a way so you can balance what your material requirements are and what you can do to grow yourself, and come up with some sort of plan to do that. It has to be really thought out.
There's another piece to this that I think is really important. And then we talked about it earlier, but given where we are, we have to start looking at things collectively.
Well, that's why I was headed with this. You saw that, what's the Killer Mike goes by that, and Andy Young, and he has another partner. They're starting a bank, and banking is a huge factor in terms of building wealth in communities. Banks are all about communities. Banks lend to people who they consider to be their good customers and who is a part of their communities. You have the merger of, Broadway Federal, which is a black bank in LA, with a black bank in New York, which basically will be a $1 billion plus deal to create a big bank. Now that sounds like a big bank, but let me tell you, a regional bank, Wells Fargo, does 1.7 trillion in business. So you have to keep this in perspective. The least amount of access to capital in terms of people in this country traditionally have been African Americans, and that's where you go to grow a business, to get a loan, to do these things. And so if you don't have access to capital, which is, these are not like these are not unknown factors. We know that Black people were denied banking products because they were Black, simply because of that. And so when you don't have access to capital, you're not able to grow in your community or have a stake in it. And that's empirical. We don't have to do the math about that. When you're not allowed to take advantage of your tax dollars in your neighborhoods because segregation, you're denied access to it, you're being plundered. Your money is going to finance somebody else's lifestyle and not your own. And that's quantifiable. We don't even need to get into reparations. You can start talking about just that. What now?
So they're still getting plundered, but by buying.
Yeah. That's the truth. Our tax dollars are transferred. So it's a wealth transfer system. And so if we don't see the benefit of those dollars, that's problematic as well. So there are many, I don't want to leave the impression that the deck is not stacked against you. It is, and woefully so. We're disadvantaged on so many levels in that sense. But there are still things that you can do. But most of it, I think, has to do, and this is where I think that you guys are indispensable, is to help people understand that their primary relationships are so important. Because what I intend to do is invest in my son. When my son goes to college, I want him to tell me what's the next thing and give him $10,000, $20,000 to go ahead. And I don't care if he fails, but that's where I'm putting my investment. My investment is not necessarily looking at the market, so to speak. There's some of that. But the best we can do is to raise good families, project them into the world in such a way that they don't have to deal with the same struggles that we had to deal with, and believe in them and give them what they need to be successful. And so that's what I'm working for.
Well, even I had this conversation with my brother yesterday, and he was like, what, our family is really good at really having the strong track for college. We're really good. He goes, but all these little kids aren't going that track. He goes, and so in particular, I was, Nasir was talking about, my son is 17, was talking about, getting into construction and design and maybe thinking about, and so we started talking about some folks we know we can connect him to who flip houses and they create this whole other thing. And I'm like, we need to do better at looking at multiple pathways, right, for building and sustaining your own wealth. One of the things that I think also you to think about is the wealth of your mental health, right? I had the epiphany a year and something ago that I was like, I will never work for white people again. Never, never, never. Now, that allowed me not partner with them, just I'll never work for them or be evaluated by them ever again. And I had to think about in my mind that it was worth it to me for my mental health and emotional well-being to figure out ways to navigate my financial pathways, right? Because my mental health is that important to me. So I think that when we start thinking about what we want people to be able to do is, yes, live and sustain yourself. But part of what we also think about is, I was talking to somebody the other day, and we're talking about how many high-powered Black women we know. We all these high-powered Black women making money, doing stuff. And I was like, the path that it takes a Black woman, especially particularly where we live, to move up a corporate ladder or anywhere else, she can still call out racism to a certain extent. She can still point out certain factors. The males that I know who've been able to do the same thing, the toll that it's taken either on them physically, emotionally, or the level of selloutness, I don't know what the word, that I have seen in order for them to make it to that same level is a whole nother thing. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm always thinking about, yes, you have to try to get on a track to create and sustain yourself in a way that's going to continue through the generations. But that also means that you have to be able to hold on to some core pieces of yourself during that time.
I think there's another piece of this. And I guess what kind of got a lot of people going was this whole idea of Black folks buying up land and kind of building our own communities again, right? Like we've done before. And these folks are thinking, I can't live worried about my son walking down the street, right? So, and again, we can't believe that we are reimagining segregation in 2020. We really are reimagining it. And again, on a broader sense, of course, it's impossible to unknow the global reality that we live in and that our children are going to live in. We can't unknow that. That's just the truth. We're not going towards a more segregated world. We really aren't. We may get a lot wrong and people are going to be blowing up stuff, whatever. But at the end of the day, we got just one little blue marble and we got to figure out how to manage in it. Black folks have always been struggling on certain levels. Then we have people who reach certain, but there's not a collective. And I guess what bothers me the most is that there's the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Everybody's just struggling individually and saying, go for it, girl, go for it, guy. When are we going to, with all of the brilliance we have in this community? Now, mind you, because, I've been injured. I tell people all the time, I know I've been injured because I don't trust folks. I just don't. And I'm going, so we get this, tract of land, we buy it, we all get together. Going back to what you and Russell said, this was based on cruelty. These are folks who, what I'm saying, like I go in for the loan. I go and get the loan. Let's say I go in to get the loan and someone white goes in and gets the loan. They said, well, here is, your percentage rate, here's your credit score, here's, what we can do for you. And then someone white goes in and goes, oh, I know a guy. Mm-hmm. I know a guy. No, don't worry about that part. I can definitely, there's always that inside track that I'm not going to get. It may not be something illegal going on, but I'm not going to get all the bells and whistles. Are you following?
Well, that is the ultimate exercise of community. And one of the things that you have to understand in just like you just described something that is very key. And that is like the coming together of communities to support one another. And I think it largely has to do with a measure of axiology. White people, white businesses, they don't have to like each other to do business with one another.
Right, it's right.
They don't have to even agree on fundamental things, but they do value overall the business. Mm-hmm. Same thing with other ethnic groups. Right. And African Americans are particular. I don't want to say that we don't love each other, because we do love each other, but in terms of how we do business, we have to accept certain shortcomings and certain flaws in individuals in order to preserve ourselves as a community. Now, I will say that there's always been intervention on the part of the United States when African Americans do come together. Like you were talking about, Greenwood Street and Black Wall Street was actually firebombed by air. That they took plane and firebombed it. So that's not like we're not. And then again, when you see, like, there's this whole idea and perception that Black people live in ghettos, and of course, ghettoization has many different definitions. But it wasn't drug addled until they started trafficking narcotics into our neighborhoods, and we don't own boats and planes in the late 70s and stuff like that. So those neighborhoods, while they might have been working class, perhaps not necessarily as economically empowered, they weren't drug addled and they weren't violent. That's a new phenomenon, and it's not something that is. But now it gets like this sort of, hasn't it always been this way with Black people? It's not the case. We just have to understand that coming together, and we've been taught not to come together as well, not to trust one another, and not to come together. So in that sense, that has to be us, to overcome that. That's why I say it starts in the home. Can you trust your son? Can you trust your wife? Can you trust your nephew? Can you trust your cousin? The idea of the family business is a godsend in this country, because you employ the people that you care for most. But you have to have a level of trust that says, we do this for one another. We maintain this business for one another. And Black people do this for one another. They have businesses. They do things like this all over the country. And they may not do it on the scale of other businesses, but because they're not able to sort of secure the capital that they would need to propel themselves into a national chain. But now what you can do is you can say, hey, look, I make spaghetti sauce, and my restaurant is an Italian restaurant. And now I can go and have a commercial kitchen, bottle my sauce. I can do distribution and advertising on the internet. And now I can be national without having one restaurant, there's ways to actually go about doing this. I mean, you have to want to do it, and you do have to have some capital to start and do things, but who else are you going to invest in? Like I said, at the end of the day, my job is to raise a family and to get them out into the world good so that they can understand and follow and pursue their dreams. but also to support them in what they want to do, and to be able to have the capital and to say, hey, look, whatever idea, in fact, I've already told them, whatever idea you have, I'm done. I'm in my 40s, there's nothing TikTok, I have no idea what's coming. Like, I am nowhere near that. So what I have is children who know everything about all that stuff. And they might brain pretty soon and start to think, hey, I want to do something like this and I can do it better and blah, 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 blah. And they should be able to come back to us and say, hey, Dad and Mom, I got this idea, where else am I going to burn $10,000 or $20,000? Or what else am I going to do at the end of the day? So,
but I think too, all families, and when I think, and my commitment has really been in really uplifting the African American community. I mean, I'm not apologetic about that. I realize that is my goal. That's my focus. These young folks that are dealing with COVID, all of us that are dealing with COVID, that everyone's trying to figure out what happens after COVID, what is there an after COVID, all of these things, we have all the machinations going on with the crazies, right? I want to be able to get one solid idea. Like I tell people, let's come together on things. Let's figure out how we can do things together. And I mean, I'm not talking about build a whole civilization. Let's just look at within my own community, how many people are interested in fill in the blank? What can we do collectively to make that happen? In my neighborhood, everybody, it's Black owned. Mm-hmm. I live in a Black owned community. The businesses, when you go out, are Black owned, right? And if not Black owned, Black managed. And so I'm looking at something that's a unique experience for a lot of people. But what it shows is it's possible. It's possible. And I'm just saying that everybody doesn't have the skills, the education, the tools, but they do have the desire. And I'm saying we need to figure out how to meet people where they are and build them where they are.
I think
or don't make them business partners, but if you recognize that somebody has, I think that's the other part is that goes back to the non-health situation where people don't all want to invest in everybody. And that's a whole nother thing. But what I do think is when you start talking about engaging with people that like my brother and Nadim and I, we don't know anything about investments. Let's be very clear. We don't know anything about it. We downloaded the Robinhood app. We've been like teetering with little things. Let me tell you something. The Robinhood app got me excited enough to start putting little drops here just to see what happens so I could learn process. But I invested in Zoom back in April. I'm happy about that. I was like, oh, Zoom, that's COVID. That's going to probably be okay. But I wouldn't have even thought about it had my brother not said, hey, download this app, which is not, I'm sure anybody who's in real finance, like, what is that? But for me, it was helpful for me to start to think about things differently. My friend Joshua is starting this whole thing around, short-term living situations. I have a whole bunch of money, but I gave him some money that I had because I'm trying to figure out, at least if I have a couple of things, people who are trying to do things that I show, I love you, I trust you, I'm going to do what I can to invest in that. And if it benefits me, if it supports you in learning from that mistake that helps you build it the next time, I got you. So for me, it's like, what was I going to spend that money on anyway? Like, it would have been food, probably.
You have a good point, but here, and that is, this is the other thing too. Like people, 9 out of 10, you learn in business school, 9 out of 10 deals fail. And we get afraid of the idea of failure and what that means about us. Now, I don't like to be political about things because I don't really feel like I'm a political person, but there's a man in the White House who has failed more times and have been allowed to get up and do all sorts of things you could talk about privilege, you can talk about all sorts of things, but there's no question that what we see as sort of successful models for business in the United States, we forget that they have failed more times over than they've actually succeeded, and sometimes succeed by accident. So we have to understand that we're not looking at perfection. We're not looking to model Black economics or Black communities after anything else. Exactly. I think that would be a mistake.
Exactly.
And the model, I think, of sort of risk taking and investment in the United States is remarkably inefficient. I mean, it wastes a lot of money. It doesn't empower enough people or enough ideas, enough minds to get the idea. It usually focuses on couple central characters, and that's it. I think we can do better in terms of a model for growth. I mean, if African Americans are nothing if not innovators. We are the most innovative people probably in the country. I mean, that's what we are known for the world over. Nobody else is rocking, Motown all over the world. I mean, nobody rocks each other's people's music like what we produce. Like, you can go to any place on the planet and hear your music. You know how
like I got on a boat on an island, and it was Tupac when all the bushes cleared. Tupac was on the side of the building.
That's right. So you take a look at the smallness of like the ideas that have germinated out of really a love for a certain art form, and see how that propagates itself. Again, the outsized impact that African Americans have had economically on the world is tremendous. We're 35, 36 million people in the country, like 1% of the world's population. But the impact we have had in terms of what that means for people who want to even come to America, in terms of what we have fought for and allowed other people to benefit from, right. And then what we have produced in the world as a roadmap to how to actually live and how to actually do things in the art forms. It's not, I mean, it's just amazing.
I'll tell you, I have one idea, and I'll tell you this. Stop.
Okay, it's that we're over 10 minutes.
We're a little over 10 minutes, but I want to say, stop giving away everything. See, black people, here's the other thing. White people go, gosh, I just am so impressed with you. I would love to sit down and steal every idea you have.
Well, this is why I had to tell Russell, I hear you. I feel you in a lofty way, in the lofty sense. I feel you, and I think we should all be striving for that. However, I can't, in good conscience, as a Black female, encourage Black people in general just to go out and find trusting
a white partner. Not for certain about that. But I would say this, that what I recognize, again, there is a long, and I don't care what your spiritual belief is. Ultimately, everybody's ultimate spiritual belief is harmony of humanity. Everybody coming together and loving each other and caring for each other and recognizing we're all one world. That's the end goal. I'm never going to see that. And neither are you. So the bottom line is, between now and then, which is ultimately we're working through that. I got to deal with eating today. Mm-hmm. I've got to deal with how can I navigate a system that is fighting to maintain disparity. Mm-hmm. We have a system that is fighting to keep this disparity going.
It requires it.
This is a unique experience in history. And so I'm saying, I always deal with the low hanging fruit. I'm not getting ready to try to convince people to do stuff. I'm gonna say, how many people want to do this? Yeah, great. Come on. I don't care who you are. Let's come together. But I'm not getting ready to spend a whole lot of time trying to get you to get it. And I think get paid for what you do. We have a tendency to devalue our skills and our gifts. Yeah. I was talking to someone today. I'm going, people say, everybody knows I have, when I do keynotes, which I haven't done, God knows if I ever do it. I am doing Zoom, right? But when I do a keynote, so I have rates, right? Rates, hour, half day, different stuff, different rates for the work I do. And then all of a sudden I started getting, God, we would love for you to come on just for an hour and talk. I said, you know how much my hour costs? But what ends up happening is it just seems like it's just a little conversation. No, it's not. It's an hour of my
time. That's the mantra that I have adopted. I have two mantras.
Get paid for the work you do.
It's called F you, pay me. No,
well, one of the things, I can appreciate where people are industries, your cottage industry in your own self. You guys are powerhouses in that respect. Nobody is going to pay me. Perhaps, at one time, you would pay a rate to sit down and talk about certain financial things and what have you. But a lot of what keeps, us from being able to turn those ideas and monetize those ideas is lack of access to capital. And that's what the banking, it's true. We can't, all of us cannot sort of monetize our gifts immediately and see the fruits of them. Right. If you're a musician, you can play a horn, you might get paid today. If you can sing, you might get paid today. These things, but not all of us are able to produce product or produce something immediately. And that's why the access to capital is so important. And that's why I think a lot of the efforts that have been made, even historically, about sort of getting community banks together that would lend to African American communities and underwrite them differently and look at them differently is always been key. But then again, we're not looking to reproduce the system that we're in, and that's kind of what's hard about this situation.
But
and
even though Malik, folks are in different industries, there is a tendency for people to think that Black folks should do things for free.
That's true.
So there is this tendency. Well, I like to I've actually had people say, "I'd love to pick your brain." I'm going, yeah. TikTok, guess how much, right? it's like, I'm gonna pick your brain, and that's literally what they do. What a great idea! Give him a ribbon. I'm getting ready to go build this industry based on that idea, right? And again, your ideas have value. You have value. Your gifts have value. And I'm not saying that, we were everywhere looking for everybody to pay us for everything, but I think we are undervalued, and we undervalue our gifts. Malik just said, here we are, this small group of people, everybody hating on us, but everybody trying to be us, right? All over the world. Everybody understands this struggle and what it's been, and we have to value what we know. I realized they started diversity. White men made more money than anybody else. They went,
and equity, diversity, and inclusion. They still do.
Diversity. Oh no, I'll found a corporation. I will hire a few tokens. Give me the contracts. It happens over and over and over again. And I'm saying your ideas have value, and you have to value it first of all to understand. So those first three, that idea of recognizing I have a gift, monetizing that gift. Figure out how to get paid for that gift, and also learning how to manage the money once you have it. Because when you haven't had anything, there's this tendency towards immediate gratification. I need to have everything right now. Everything. I need a Bentley, I need to get the house, I need to get everything, and not pay my taxes. But the bottom line is,
final words, because yes.
Okay, I'm ready.
Those are critical things that Russell gave us. We love those. We also had to remember, guess what? You do have a gift somewhere in there. And the other thing is, Malik is saying, it don't have to be your gift. You can recognize I am so good at singing, but I am not going to get paid to do that in this particular rural community where it has no money. But I do know that people don't have recycling or whatever it is, and figuring out a need and filling that need. Most inventions come from people trying to fill a need. And that's been a cornerstone of a lot of our wealth in our communities. It was like, how could I make myself a washing machine?
I want to also I have a final thing to say.
Yeah, final thought.
My final thought is, you bring up a very good point, and that is like, you're deciding how can you do X, Y, Z. I think that there's a mythology around like very wealthy people's success and how they became successful, and that they were just hardworking and smart. No, that's not the case. I mean, a lot of the people who we look at as perhaps, economic heroes, from Richard Branson, he got to start, bootlegging other people's records. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like he was doing things on the up and up, but they celebrate him now. Same thing, with the, Damon John. I mean, I'm not saying that he wasn't hustling and he was a hard worker. All these people work very, very hard, but then so does the guy in the rice paddy who works, 12 hours a day. He found an opportunity, and he got an opportunity and was able to move his business from one point to the other. But a lot of this stuff has to do with just simply being consistent and staying on top of it. And being consistent helps to build trust. And that's the thing. Like you're talking about, what can we do in COVID? We can look at within ourselves and ask ourselves two questions. What do we really want? Do you just want to grind? Even if you were making, lots of money, being paid for a corporation, do you want to work for a corporation for 30 years and get paid and retire? That could be your goal. And if it is, by all means, get on the track to doing that sort of thing. But then, you might find out that's not really what you really want. Figure out what you want and be consistent. Just be consistent, because consistency tells people in your community you can be trusted to do certain things. Mm-hmm. You're going to show up tomorrow morning. He's been doing it for 30 years. He's going to be at his desk at 8 o'clock for 30 years.
or if they're not. And so therefore, because I like them, I'm not going to hire them.
There you go.
There's been several times people have been like, you need to fire that person. I don't like him. I'm like, I don't like him either. But guess what they do? They do this service.
That's the other part.
Well. And it's hard. They also think that, I've been in situations where I've had to advocate on behalf of other Black people who are assholes. if you're good at your job, it shouldn't matter if you're an asshole, okay? White men they can be assholes all day long and they'll still keep their job, okay, if they're good at it. But if you're a black, you gotta smile and shuffle, or they're like, I don't know that that's a good fit. I'm like, no, they're good at their job. They're just not friendly. They don't like you. That's okay. So part of it is, I'm not gonna tap dance for you. That's what I realized.
That's afforded. That's something that's afforded them. We have to be, we have to be, exceptional in whatever way. We have to both have that personality that people tend to. But
that was my motivation, Malik, to figure out what can I do to not work for white people. That's what I was. You know what I don't want.
And more importantly for me is, I was working in the academy, and I'm giving you the power to determine whether or not I can move.
No.
I mean, you know how many times black people have had to be.
You certainly can't evaluate it.
I'm not doing that. I'm not gonna let you. Like I said, I work at Sears and they close it. I work at Sears, but I am not going to do whatever it is.
Wait, Malik, every damn mom would call me at one of my former jobs that I will remain nameless. She's like, how are you doing? I'd say, well, I'm always about 5 minutes from becoming a barista. I said, because you know what's going to happen? I said, I'm going to cuss them smooth out, and then I'm going to be serving my coffee, and I'll be like, and let me tell you what I said then. Want some cream? And then I told them, want some sugar? I said, I would be so happy to recount my stories of telling them folks off to my customers. But yes, I was like, this close, being a barista, because at the end of the day, you got to also figure out what's going to sustain you.
That's right.
I work so that I can live my life. I don't live to work. That's not how I'm wired. And so for me, not for everybody, but for me, I need to figure out a way that I can have like for instance, my thing is my tub. If I could afford my tub that I have right now, my tub, you understand? I love this tub. This tub is going to be in my will to someone. I've invited my brother. Last week, I told him, I said, do you want to take a bath? I'm going out of town. So finally, he said to me, I may take you up on it, because I've told him it's a magical experience. Okay. My mother, Joy, what did I give you for your birthday? A bath tray and a luxurious bath mat that goes all the way from your head all the way under to your knees. It's wonderful. I'm telling you, I sit in there with my music. I got Wayne Shorter going. I have my hot tea. I have my candles happening. I have my mystical poems by Rumi. I had the Conference of the Birds there one day, just sitting there mystically contemplating the universe. Nothing else, no reality TV.
You've got to, at the end of the day, this is Wellness Wednesday. And what we want to make certain that people are able to do is to be well, is to feel whole, is to feel okay. And again, the sacrifice that we've had to make, people have said, sometimes you got to work doing what you don't want to do until you can do what you really do want to do. And so you do what you have to do. And that so much of our lives are spent on what we have to do. You got to spend some of that time doing what you want to do. You got to spend some of that time taking care of yourself. And you need to let the people in your life see you taking care of yourself because they won't learn that that's something that they need to do. So again, this has been
I tell you that yesterday for Mental Health Tuesday, I had Jante. If anyone wants to know the number, I'll give it to you. If you live in the Portland, Washington area, she'll come to you with her mask. I got a 90-minute massage. My son got a massage. My daughter got a massage. Why? Not for luxury, for mental health. You know what I'm saying? For me, it's like being still, not having to think about anything but
she's the truth. She's the truth.
Jante is the truth, Ruth, and I might have to call her again tomorrow. So yeah, hit me up in the chat if you're interested in her and you're in the area, because she is quite amazing. But yeah, self-care and taking care of yourself is super important. Even if you don't have a bathtub like mine, which everyone should wish that you do. But if you're a friend of mine, I've already gifted 2 people for their birthdays baths. They came over, I left them alone. They had a great experience. So if you don't have a bath, if you need a candle, you can do breathing exercises. You can do all those things, but start to have conversations, like Malik said, around messages that have been given to you about money. Messages that have been given to you about what you can afford, what you can have, changing the language around, being scarcity and the idea of not having enough to saying, wow, look at all that we have. That abundance model, how we have so much love in this house.
And please help somebody else.
Yeah.
It's not, sometimes the real gifts come from giving.
Support businesses and don't ask for a discount. Okay.
So
Thank you, Malik. I appreciate you. I might be hitting you up for some financial advice in the near future. If I can get some ducats, but I appreciate you, and we'll see you all later. Thank you.
be safe, be well, be happy.
Be the healing, and the t-shirts will be available soon.
They'll be and the hoodies.
Oh yeah, the hoodies. Okay.
Long sleeves.
And the long sleeve t-shirts for the old black ladies.
The old people who have arms that wave. Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Good.